Hello, Journey Church, and welcome to week 1 of the 11 Letters message series. Before we get started with today's message, let's play a little game. We've produced a word search with 5 hidden words. Think you can spot all 5? Let's put 30 seconds on the clock and find out. On your marks, get set, go. Here's a pro tip. Try looking harder. Don't give up, you're almost there. Time's up. Let's see how you did. Here's word 1, next. Word 2, step. Word 3, tent. Word 4, Jackson. And word 5, fun zone. Did you find all 5 words? If not, better luck next time. But for now, let's get ready for week 1 of 11 letters.
If I could speak with a great British accent, I would do the whole service like that just because I could. But I can't, so you're stuck with this instead. Good morning. My name's Chris. I'm part of the team here at Journey. I'm glad you're here this morning as we kind of kick off a 3-week series called 11 Letters. I don't know if it's ever happened to you. When I park in a big parking lot, I usually find the first space, park my car, and walk in. I'm not like a cruiser or one of those who hovers, but every now and then you see somebody in one of the really good places, and when you see them go into their car and about to get in and you want to do it, have you ever noticed that it takes them between 1 and 4 hours to back out? When you're waiting, it is a horrible thing. And actually, it seems like it always takes longer. And then I was reading this week, as I often do, in the Journal of Applied Social Psychology, which is like my second Bible. I love that. And it actually said in a study that someone has done that hundreds of drivers, they found that it actually takes longer to leave a parking space when we know someone is waiting to pull in. It literally takes longer. I don't know if the issue is just like, this is my space. I hate to give it up, it's mine. And if I give it up, whose it'll be then? It'll be theirs. And so it's not just there. There's many other places. It's like there's this weird thing that goes on inside of us that wants to kind of keep what we have. Matter of fact, if you're in a car line for school, or if you're somewhere where traffic is trying to move, and if you honk at somebody, studies show that person will take longer to do what they're doing because you honked. Now, some people will do well to learn that, unless you go to like Chicago, and then you can't drive without doing it. It's like Braille there. You just travel by that. To make it even worse, in a restaurant, statistics say that it will take the average person 4 times longer to leave a booth if there's a line of people waiting for a booth. What is it inside of people that makes that happen? It's this issue of, it's mine. What I've got, I want to keep. And I don't think most people do it on purpose. It just seems to be kind of built in. I think in life, there's probably no bigger place that we struggle with carving out space than when it comes to God. I think for many of us, with good intentions, as a matter of fact, for everybody sitting here today, well played, because you awake this morning. You have driven, most of you got dressed pretty much from what you were wearing before, and so way to go on that one. And way to go just getting here, but for most of us in life, there are so many demanding things. There are so many things that require our attention. Sometimes the hardest thing you can do is carve out space for God. Not just for God in the big picture, but to carve out space where you can kind of dig in deeper, where you can pray at a deeper level, where you can open a Bible and spend more than 30 seconds passing through, where you can build a friendship at a soul level with another human being. Sometimes carving out that kind of space is just the hardest thing to do, and it's not because we don't care. It's just because life is incredibly demanding. So I was reading in the last couple of weeks about our series is called 11 Letters, and there's a reason for that. And I was reading about how many words the average human uses in a day. There are very conflicting research on this issue. Now, a lot of old research said this, that the average man speaks about 7,000 words in a given day. Right? You with me so far? 7,000. You want to guess about what average research says that a woman speaks in a day? 20,000. Now, I'm not saying I believe that's true, because there's very conflicting research around it. But I want to say this, if they do speak 20,000, I think every one of them are meaningful and should be listened to. My wife did not even hear this service, and so that was just straight from the heart. Next service, that'll be, well, wanting a great afternoon. 13,000 words different. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know if the studies all hold true since they don't come to the same point. But here's something I do know. By about the age of 10 years old, average 10-year-old has about 5,000 words in their active vocabulary. And if you've got a 10-year-old, they probably use all 5,000 of those several times a day, especially a few of them, like mom or whatever it is that they want. By the time you're an adult, the average English-speaking person has about a 20,000 active word vocabulary and about a 40,000 passive word, maybe just words you'd recognize but not typically pull out in a conversation. So somewhere between 20 and 40,000 words that people can use. Well, I was going to do a series on those 20 to 40,000 words, but I only had 3 weeks. And so we have really limited that down. As a matter of fact, I want to talk to you this week and the next 2 over 3 words, just got it down to 3, 11 letters, that if we mastered, if we learned to use them appropriately, learn to control them, that they could change so much of our life. 11 simple letters that could change the way life works for most of us. Today I want to start with the first one, and this one we know. By the way, it's a really small one. It is one that the average 2-year-old has mastered saying it, and we just use it for the rest of our lives. The problem is it is often easy to use, but it's hard to use well. You want to guess what the word is? You don't? Okay, well, we'll move on. The word is no. 2 letters. No. I read this article this week by a lady by the name of Shauna Nyquist, and she said some things as I began to read through it that really rang a bell for me. Maybe it will for you. I'll just give you one paragraph of it. It says, and so if you, like me, have said too many yeses and found that all that hopeful, exciting, wide open intention has actually left you scraped raw and empty, the word that can change everything is no. No, I don't like it either. Yes is fun and sparkly and printed on tote bags, which is always my concern. No. What if you saw someone wearing a sweatshirt that just said no? I don't want to sit next to that bundle of fun. She says this, but no became the scalpel I wielded as I remade my life. Most of us are good at saying no. It's just saying no to the right things. The truth is, balancing our yeses and nos determines our outcome in a million different ways. The reason that we need to learn to say no's, and I'll just start with this, it's kind of the foundation of everything we're going to talk about through this series, but certainly for today. The reason to say no to a lesser good is so that you can say yes to a greater good. Choosing the no's in your life will determine the yeses that can be said. Often the problem is there is so much pressure to say yes that no becomes a really difficult thing. There are people all through Scripture, if you started in Genesis, that's where kind of the book begins. Well, it starts with like index, but we don't read that book a lot. And as you go all the way through, there are great examples of people who said huge yeses in their life. And then there's examples of people who said no, that were offered options, that they weren't necessarily always bad, but they weren't best, and they said no. And I wanted to go through all of those, but it seemed like the smartest one to land on was a guy named Jesus. In Jesus' world, He waited 30 years from when he was born to start doing ministry actively with people on earth. He did life, but his ministry actually started about the age of 30, and he had just a little over 3 years. There was a lot riding on his shoulders. In 3 years, eternity for mankind was going to be shifted. That's a pretty big job. To recruit a team, to pass on the message, for them to claim it and run with it. Pretty big job. I don't know what you've got going on. I bet it's important and you have a lot of stress and pressure. I don't know that anybody had more than him. Well, oddly enough, his ministry didn't start out with a great I have a yes speech. He didn't stand up and move. Matter of fact, his ministry started quite different than that. Matter of fact, the way it started is not the way anybody would recommend. So if you have a Bible, look in Luke chapter 3, or if you're using your YouVersion on your phone or your mobile app, or if you want to go to ourjourney.news, you can look at message notes there. We'll also put them on the screen. We can't cover any more ways. We got smoke signals. We'll have them outside if you have to go out there during the service. Luke chapter 3, verse 21, and this is kind of where we start for today. It says, after all the people were baptized, Jesus was baptized. And as he was praying, the sky opened up, and the Holy Spirit, like a dove descending, came down on him. And along with the Spirit, a voice, "You are my Son, chosen and marked by my love, pride of my life." And so here, this is kind of when Jesus goes public with what his ministry is going to be. It starts with his baptism, and his Father at that point. Jesus was already loved, right? This wasn't the start of his Father loving him. This was just a public announcement of that. His Father said, that's my boy right there. Yes, it is. Everybody around got it. Jesus got it. And it's such a highlight. You would think at this moment, he would have said something miraculous. He would have stopped everyone and said, everybody sit down for a minute. I've got some very Jesus-like things to say. The next 3 years, I'm going to be very busy changing the world. But he didn't. As a matter of fact, the next things we begin to find in Luke chapter 4, it says this, "Then Jesus, full of the Holy Spirit, returned from the Jordan River, and he was led by the Spirit in the wilderness, where he was tempted by the devil for 40 days. And then there's this brilliant sentence, Jesus ate nothing at all. Jesus ate nothing all that time, and then became very hungry. Sometimes people say words that they're not really needed, and I'm not at all. I'm never going to say the Bible has unneeded words in it, but if the Bible had unneeded words in it, this is one that this guy right here could have seen coming. Jesus went 40 days and did not eat, but just in case there's anybody sleeping in the audience, it gives this added part, and he was very hungry. Didn't see that coming, did you? Well, Captain Obvious, that's what happened. At the end of that, by the way, Captain Obvious has a Facebook page and says so many cool things on it. You could lose 30 minutes of your life right there reading Captain Obvious. I don't recommend that officially because that's not my job, but if you go there, it's good entertainment. What a good-looking beard. Jesus goes after his baptism and after his start, he ends up in a faraway place, all alone, 40 days. He does not eat, and what he does while he's there is he's tempted. What an odd way to start your ministry. And then this is what it says next. Then the devil said to him, "If you are the Son of God, tell this stone to become a loaf of bread." Now, that might not sound all that tempting to you, but if you haven't eaten for 40 days, or for some of us 40 hours, and for a few 40 minutes, it doesn't take much to get you pretty excited. So the thought of turning anything into bread would be a really big deal. Jesus doesn't start his ministry with a great yes. As a matter of fact, he starts it with 3 very emphatic no's, and this is the first one. But Jesus told him no. The scriptures say people do not live by bread alone. That's a weird thing to say. He's tempted, turn the stone into bread. No, the scriptures say man doesn't live by bread alone. Now, that actually wasn't a new thing. If you went all the way back in scripture to Deuteronomy, Jesus was just quoting something that had already been written. As a matter of fact, it was written by a guy by the name of Moses, and Moses, toward the end of his life, was reflecting back on a lot of things that had happened to him. Matter of fact, he said these words, He said, God humbled you, talking to the people who had come out of Egypt. God humbled you, causing you to hunger and then feeding you a manna which neither you nor your ancestors had ever known. He did it to teach you that man does not live by bread alone, but on every word that comes out of the mouth of God. There's this crazy moment for him where he goes to the point of saying, I'm not saying this originally, I'm repeating what has been said. Moses told you, you can't just live by bread. Why all the talk of bread? See, when the people were in Egypt, there was this unique thing. You know what most of them did? They built big warehouses or big barns or big storage areas. And mainly, do you know what they stored in it? Grain. And mainly, do you know what they made out of grain? Bread. They came from a place in Egypt where they said you can never have enough. As a matter of fact, the more storage, the more grain, the more storage and grain, the more power, because he who has food in an unrefrigerated world wins. And so they came from a place that said more is always better. What you have will determine your outcome. And so when Jesus comes along and he said you don't live by bread alone, he's not talking about the stuff we make toast from. His point is a little bit deeper than that. And it brings him to temptation one. And temptation one is this: you are what you have. That's the temptation that Jesus was faced with, and that's the temptation we're faced with. You are what you have. You are what you have in your goods. It's your stuff. It wasn't just about bread. The word bread there talks about kind of life at the point of acquiring things. And man, there's a pressure in our world today. I don't know where it came from. There's this thing that says define yourself by your stuff, by the appetites you can fill. It's not what you want, but what you have that will determine. And we often compare ourselves to the people around us. You can find your identity by having nice stuff, or a nice house, or a nice car, or a nice whatever it is that your appetite desires. And a lot of us spend most of our life trying to fill that one desire. It's a difficult thing. The symptom, whether or not you have that issue, is when your appetites are always on your mind, whatever it is that you want. That's usually a sign that you're not living a very healthy life and you need a very emphatic no in your life. Does that ever happen with you? Whether it's a something, whether it is a purchasable thing or something else that could identify you, do you ever struggle with that? Well, life is you are what you have. The symptom is that I continually think about my wants. If you ever diet, typically the hardest part of a diet is you think about what you don't have. If the compulsion is to find Amazon is overwhelming you, and even sitting here today, you may have placed an order. It might be a sign that you need a fairly emphatic no. Well, the answer to that is simple enough. And I don't like this one, by the way. I like a couple of the other ones. I would have found a different one, but this one's just the truth. I like talking about things that affect you but don't affect me. But I've got a lot of stuff that I need affected, so sometimes it's hard to speak that way. The answer to that temptation, you are what you have, is simply this. Do without some of the stuff. Do without. The Bible, when it talks about doing without, often uses a word that we don't use many other places in this setting. It's the word fast. To fast is literally to do without on purpose for a purpose. It's not just doing without. That's not fasting. Some people are just without. They're not fasting, they're poor. Some people just don't have food, they're not fasting, they're starving. There's a big difference. Fasting is to temporarily refrain from something, and the purpose of it is to make space for something better, typically God. And so for many of us, going without would be a healthy thing. It helps me see what it feels like when I'm deprived of something that I typically would have. And so for some people, maybe the fitting place for you to say no to something might have to do with food. Perhaps you could just say from from I'm going to skip dinner tonight and then tomorrow morning I'll start eating again. And during that time, the goal is not to be deprived. The goal is in that time because your senses will be heightened. You will feel and think differently during that. And the goal is that you turn your attention when you feel those appetites toward God, because it's a very difficult thing to do in the busyness of life. The first meal you have in the morning, do you know what that is called? Anybody? Breakfast. You know where that word came from? It literally in the first days meant to break your fast. It's when your fast ended and you ate. Breakfast. So maybe that would be a healthy thing. Maybe it's more than that. It's for a day, or maybe it's for longer for you. But the purpose of it, once again, is not doing without. The purpose of fasting is not to get God to do something you really, 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 really want. It's not like a spiritual combination lock. I'm going to fast, so God will have to do that. And God's like, I don't think that's best for you. But you skipped lunch, so here you go. It's not really the purpose. The purpose is that we can take our attention and we can notice our appetites, and we can turn our appetites toward the one who has the ability to quench what we need so much better than our stuff. Or maybe for you, it wouldn't be food. Maybe it would be shopping. Because sometimes we fill our appetites with those things. When I don't feel complete in who I am, sometimes I need more things. And when I have more things, it's a very endless cycle. And some people, that's just a joke to you, but for some people, that's a very real thing. And so maybe for you, stop. I talked to someone a couple of weeks ago that said for 1 month, we decided outside of absolute essentials, we weren't going to buy anything for 30 days. Basic essential. I know everybody's got different ways of describing their essentials. Just our basics. I said, what was that like? And he said, it was grueling. He said, there were days I just wanted to buy things I didn't even want. It just felt like I was missing something. But then he talked about recognizing that if I fill every appetite that comes along, usually what will get put on the back shelf is God. So maybe it could be shopping. Maybe for some of us, it would be, this one's the worst of all. I won't mention any more after this. Maybe it would be fasting with our electronics. Because there's this thing, I don't know if this ever happens with you, where there's a little ding when you get a text or an email, or there's this little vibration, this little buzz. It's called getting buzzed. That's what that means, right? You're not even supposed to drive when that's happening now. Driving buzzed will get you in trouble. I heard it on a commercial. And it is when that happens. Does it ever bother you, like if you're not next to your phone and you hear that little vibration or you hear that little ding? Is there something inside of you that just says, I don't want to look while I'm talking to you, but I want to look really badly? Look, a bird. And then you run over. There's all kinds of stuff that researchers are finding now that happen in our brain when we hear that sound that strikes all of these chemical releases in our brain and in our body, because there's this feeling that I might be missing something and I don't want to miss something. The average American looks at their phone 150 times a day, and it's not just because you want to know what time it is. That all of us have this appetite to know, to be included. And so maybe a healthy thing for us. Can you imagine what would happen to the average person if they looked to God 150 times in a day? What it would do to our lives? That's not anti-technology. It is just saying sometimes our appetites don't lead us toward the healthiest thing. Therefore, the temptation is you are what you have, and the response is do without. Second temptation that Jesus faced in Luke chapter 4, verse 5, it says this, then the devil took him up and revealed to him all the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time. I will give you the glory of these kingdoms and authority over them, the devil said, because they are mine to give to anyone I please. I will give it all to you if you will worship me. Jesus replied, the scriptures say, you must worship the Lord your God and serve him only. The second temptation wasn't just you are what you have. The second temptation was you are what you do. You are what you do. If you'll just do what I tell you, I'll make you something else. Often in our world today, there's this feeling is if you don't do much, then you aren't much. The more I do, the better I am, the more important I am, the more valuable I am. And part of the problem in life today, for some people just don't do much. But for most people, especially that sit in seats and have the discipline to get up on a Sunday morning, For most people, the problem is we have so much to do that it's hard to get it all done, and it's hard to find priority in that. When Jesus began his ministry, it's interesting. He didn't preach a sermon. He didn't write a book. He didn't hit Twitter. He didn't draw a crowd. He didn't recruit some leaders. He didn't train. The first thing he did is for 40 days, he went off into a solitary place. That's just unheard of. That is bad strategy. How to use your time well would not be on his list. But that's what was necessary for him to prepare for the next 3 years of his life. And for us, here's this crazy thing, and I know there's some people in the room, because I get it. Sometimes I feel this argument going on because I do it when somebody else is speaking. When they're speaking, I go, yeah, it's easy for you to say. Like, I have so much time to not do anything. If I had more time for that, I wouldn't have to. But I'll just tell you, saying that it's hard to do, it doesn't mean it's not necessary to do. Some of you have got kids. It's the reason the most favored room in the house by most moms is a bathroom. It's the only door with a lock on it. And maybe that's you. You say, there's not a moment. I just want to say to you, I want to encourage you, whether it's difficult or not, it doesn't make it untrue, that we need time when we do less. The temptation is this: you are what you do. The answer to that is to do less. In the Bible, that's often called a Sabbath, or it is taking time to rest and reflect on that which is most important. Read a story the other day about a dad who took his son to Disney. And at Disney, they were walking around and they wanted to do all these things, and they were really excited. The little boy was about this tall and the dad was about this tall. And the dad had a plan, because you've got to, if you spend that much money, you've got to have a plan to get through lines as fast as you can, to get from here to there as fast as you can. And the boy was just in awe. He kept just looking around and taking it in. And the whole time his dad kept dragging him by the hand. Come on, we've got to get from here to there so we can wait in line, so we can ride that, so we can get over there. And the boy kept saying, Dad, can we look at that? No, come on. You stop standing there. We got to have fun. And finally, the boy grabbed his dad's hand and he said, Dad, stop. I've got an idea. Could you follow me instead of me following you? And the dad kind of came to his senses. He's like, all right, yeah, I get what he said. My big, long legs in my hurry are dragging him around. And so he did. And the boy started walking. And as he started walking, he saw something cool. And he stopped and he looked. And the dad kept going. He pulled his dad's hand back. And then he took off again. And in a minute, he saw something else. And he just wanted to enjoy what he saw. And the dad kept going. And he finally said, Dad, if you're going to follow me, you're going to have to stay behind. And for most of us, that's the hardest part of following Jesus. What we want to do is take Jesus with us, but Jesus called us to follow him. And to follow Jesus means there's going to be time he's going to ask you to slow down. He did it all the time. He took time to pray. He went to a garden. He went to a faraway place. And you may say, and I may say, I just don't have time for that. But if we're that busy, we really don't have time not to do that, because learning that no is what will keep us healthy or sane or moving forward. The symptom of this disease, the symptom of this need, is this little phrase: even when you are somewhere, you're very seldom somewhere. A long time ago, my wife, in a really busy time in our world, said to me, hey, I wish you'd been here. And I said, Leslie, I was here. I did this, I did this, I did this. And then in a moment of clarity for her that I didn't like to hear but sure needed to hear, she said, Chris, even when you're here, you're very seldom here. And one of the symptoms of overly busy lives is often, even when you're here, we're not really here. Even when we're with our kids or when we're with our families, we're not really with them. Even sometimes sitting in church, it's just hard to be there, because there's so many things that press and there's so many things to distract, sometimes being anywhere. And it is a sign that we need to push pause. We need to slow down. By the way, if you're a parent of younger kids today, this one is hitting you more than anybody right now, because there's this deal that says if you want to be a good parent, you've got to have your kids involved in everything. They've got to take one more of those or two more of those or play on three more of those. You've got to go, and if you don't, you're never going to match somebody else's Facebook post. And if you ever slow down, and sometimes the hardest thing in the world is to figure out the no's in life. And I don't know where those are. I mean, I would never think I could know those for you, but I know from talking to lots of parents that if you don't regularly, once, twice, 3 times a year, say, you know what, all bets are off, we're going to start over. Here's our yeses and here's our nos. Eventually the yeses will overrun your life. And you'll be so busy doing life with your kids that you'll forget to do life with your kids. Sometimes we just have to say no and do less. The third piece of this, then the devil took him to Jerusalem, to the highest point in the temple, and he said, if you're the Son of God, jump off. For the scripture says, he will order his angels to protect and to guard you, and they will hold you in their hands, and they won't even hurt your foot on a stone. And Jesus responded, the scriptures also say you must not test the Lord your God. And then this weird little verse just thrown in at the end. And when the devil had finished tempting Jesus, he left him until the next opportunity came. What a weird way to finish. He left him till later. He said, jump off. Jesus said, no, this temptation is you are what people think of you. His point was, if you jump off and you're okay, everybody's going to follow you. You are what people think of you. And maybe this isn't difficult for you. There's a lot of people who say human approval is not part of you. I don't care what anybody thinks. But the truth is, usually the people who say that loudest care the most. We just show it in different ways. The approval of someone, you know what? Some of us are working for the approval of people who aren't even around anymore. Sometimes we're working for the approval of people who don't even know our name. It's just a hard world. It is hard to balance all of those things. I just want to tell you the answer to that, and this is a tough one, is to do something without any approval. Maybe this is a better way to say it. Say a no that needs to be said, even if it disappoints someone. There's some of us in this room that disappointing someone might be the hardest thing ever. Jesus was perfect. He never sinned. Let me tell you this remarkable thing. In his life, everybody that ever dealt with him, he disappointed. How about that for a statement? For the Messiah, for the chosen one, the creator of the universe. When there was a whole crowd around, they wanted Jesus to overthrow their enemies and take over and be the king, and then he didn't. And they were disappointed in him. The religious leaders wanted Jesus to quit hanging out with the wrong people because it was lowering the religious people's reputation, and he wouldn't, and he disappointed them. When Jesus' mom and his family wanted him to kind of come back and quit doing all this crazy stuff, he disappointed them, and the last thing they wanted him to do was die. When Herod wanted him to do some of that magic and wow him, Jesus disappointed him. John and James wanted to sit on either side of him, one on the left and one on the right, and Jesus disappointed them. The truth is, Jesus disappointed everybody in his world except his Father. When Jesus came on the earth, he was put here for a reason. When he was 12 years old, he said, I have to be about my Father's business. And the day they took his life, or he gave his life on our behalf, he said, it is finished. And the one person, the one entity he never disappointed was just his Father. And the truth is, you will never, ever please everyone. And for some of us, we have to learn that not just saying no for the sake of disappointing people, that's not the game. Some of you are going to walk out, whatever happens today, you're going to go, no, they said to do it in church. No. Well, that's just another normal day. That doesn't help. Don't do that. That's bad. But for some of us to say no's that need to be said would be life-changing. It would be necessary. So the answer is do without human approval. This week, is there something you need to say no to, even if it means it disappoints someone? You know, we said when we started that we say no to lesser things so that we can say yes to greater things. And the truth is, if we don't learn the appropriate no's, we'll never experience the greatest things. We're going to say no's every day. You say a lot of no's. Even if you don't think you do, every choice you make is a whole series of no's because you can't do both. Choosing the right ones is a big deal. Here's the greatest fear: in an effort to take control and get the most out of life, often we lose control of the very life we've been given. That we run 100 miles an hour, and in the end, we lose control of the one thing that God wanted us to control, and that's our own life. And those are going to be a part of it. I'll just tell you this, for me, in my life, I don't have a lot of huge regrets. Some. Quite a few years ago, I reached a point in my world, worked in a church, did things that most people would consider good things, and I did a lot of things. I got up early and I went busy all day long. I had kids at home and I tried to be at all of their things. I tried to please everybody I could please, including God and including me. And I found myself after about 4 or 5 years of that running on empty so much that what I realized is I was so busy doing for God that I had no time for God. I was so busy doing for my kids, I had no time for my kids. I was so busy caring that I had lost my ability to care well. It's like I've driven so fast and so far and so long that my tank is hit empty. The only problem is the light had been on for a long time, but I'd paid no attention to it. And I reached the point where somebody had to help me. And some friends in my life just said, Chris, I think you're not who you used to be. I'm like, do you not realize how hard I'm working at this? And what somebody finally had to tell me is maybe it was time to slow down. Maybe it was time to focus on what's most important. Maybe more is not everything. And for me, it meant I had to adjust a lot in life so I could have my life back. And I know that may not make any sense to some of you, but I bet you money it makes sense to somebody in this room. When you've lost the ability to feel and love and care, maybe a no would be appropriate for you. Maybe a few. It's not no for the sake of no, it's just no to lesser things so you can say yes to greater things. I just wonder where that might land for you. Let's pray. So God, this morning, man, I don't know anybody else in the room's life to the detail that I would know what no's need to be said. But you know in my life, with good intentions, well-meaning as I've been, that one of my regrets in life that I have been so busy getting the most out of life that I've lost control of it. That didn't honor you. I didn't honor my family. It didn't honor me. And for those of us who face these temptations that are faced every day, they're real. Would you just give the wisdom even this week for some very simple no's? Not aggressive in your face, I'm sick of everybody no's, but the honest no's that are led by you. Would you give peace? Would you refuel some who are running on empty? Would you give focus to those who've lost it? And mostly, would you help us recognize that you are indeed the bread that we need, and we'll place our trust in you. Thanks for speaking to our needs. We ask it in your name.